Hi, Nigel. Thank you very much for being with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Barrett. It's early morning in Texas, but I'm raring to go. I got up especially early, so I was wide awake for this.
Thank you very much for your time in such early time in your time zone. So I think all of us are very excited about your presentation. So stage is yours.
Well, thank you, everybody, and good morning from Texas, USA. It's just after 6:30 in the morning, and good afternoon in Turkey, where it's much later in the afternoon. I want to talk to you a little bit today about mindset and about how we can sort of move forward with some of the traditional tools and techniques. I've been doing quite a few speeches over the last few weeks, and I took a little bit of inspiration from a talk I gave in Poland a couple of weeks ago when I was physically there, and I want to use a little bit of what I talked about there for everybody in Turkey today. We hear a lot of talk, and indeed the last speaker I was listening to, Mark Evan Continental, was talking about the Agile mindset, and I want to challenge a few of the sort of things around this concept of mindset. I want to take you on a short journey and leave you with a couple of tools that I think that everybody should be using, and I think that we may have forgotten some of those key fundamentals. So let's look at this word mindset. There's this great German word, which if I remember how to pronounce correctly is Weltanschauung, which is really just a perception. It's your worldview. And that's the key thing, your view of the world. And so when you try and impose a mindset on somebody, you're trying to impose your worldview on somebody else, and that just isn't possible. So really we need to be looking at how we adapt our behaviors, which is the way we act or conduct ourselves in response to a particular situation or a stimulus. Because if we're not careful, we end up with this sort of groupthink mindset. And I have a lot of debates online with the folks from the safe world and these big frameworks. And really we end up in this groupthink mindset where everybody's saying the same thing. They're all saying they've got this mindset, but what they're actually doing is just nodding their heads when they're thinking no, and they're just agreeing with the most senior person in the room. And what we need to be careful of is avoiding the 1984 George Orwell type of mindset, which everybody is just compliant with a way of doing things. We need to remember as well, I had listened to Marco mention the Agile Manifesto just before in the previous talk. You've got to remember the Agile Manifesto is just a philosophy. It's not a methodology. It's not a prescriptive way of doing things. It's just a set of ideas that a bunch of guys came up with that they thought were the right principles and values for how we should develop software. And of course, now we talk about product development. So this Agile thing is just a philosophy. And what we actually need to develop is something called a shared mental model, which is really the collective understanding or perception or knowledge about the situation or process shared amongst the team members. So within the context you're in, the collective understanding of what the problem is and how we're trying to solve it and how we're going to work together and the various resources at our disposal. And this is very context specific. That's a little bit on mindset, just to set the tone for this. But I also want to mention this sort of whole sort of focus of Agile without lean, because I believe that a lot of people have also forgotten the fundamentals behind this Agile movement. This whole world of Agile was born in lean thinking, and the inspiration for a lot of the original creators of the Agile Manifesto came from the lean thinking world, and in fact the world I worked in for many years, which is the Toyota world. And so I think that a lot of these people waving their PDF certificates at various different organizations, these certified Agilists and Scrum stars, as I amusingly call them, you're trying to affect organizational change without even having a fundamental grasp of the basics of lean, never mind this concept of agility. And for some time, I've been talking to people about saying, look, if you want to be agile, then first get lean. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of tools on this as we get into this conversation a little bit more. The other thing to understand is Scrum doesn't make you agile. Ken Schwaber's described Scrum as a planning cadence, and it is a planning approach. It's a standardized, repeatable process that helps you plan work more effectively and work in a way that receives feedback on a regular basis so you can adjust how you're delivering work. But just because you're doing Scrum or following SAFe or doing something else doesn't make you super agile, because agility is emergent, and agility is an emergent property of the way we work and the way we do work and the way we behave. It's how we approach things is how we become agile, not just by doing a methodology or following a particular framework. And I define agility at 4 different levels, and this is really important. And we've heard some of the early speakers have talked about agility at leadership level. Well, business agility or organizational agility is how fast you can change direction based on external events and triggers like the pandemic or like global political situations or major shifts in the markets and the demands from our customers, often before your competition does. So how quickly can you change direction and seize upon opportunities before your competition seize upon those opportunities? That's business agility. But then you've got product agility, and that's responding to the needs of your customers often before they discover those needs themselves. And that's something called unarticulated need. And of course, Steve Jobs showed us that when he stood on stage some years ago and showed us the iPhone and showed us there was something we needed before we actually knew we needed it. That's product agility. So how fast can you change your functions, features, capabilities, and deliver those to the market before your competition steals the opportunity? And then we get down to team agility, which is being able to respond rapidly to emerging requirements. You hear this talk of complex work all the time, and you hear this talk about the way we discover things as we do work, which is why we can't create scope and fix rigid projects up front. Well, if we're doing that, we need to be able to respond to emerging requirements, new things we discover on the journey. How willing or able or capable is your team able to respond to those? How rapidly can you make the right decisions? And then individual agility. It's your agility or your willingness to be adaptable and flexible in the way you work and support your team. How much are you willing to change what you do and to alter your behaviors to better support your team so the team can deliver the features and functions and capabilities for the products, and that the organization is better informed to make rapid decisions? And so look, simply stating this is lean thinking comes from the world of optimizing value and quality, eliminating all that non-value added activity and focusing on delivering high quality product and high value product. Agility is really making faster decisions. How quickly can you make decisions on the scope or direction of a product? How quickly can the organization make decisions and change direction? How quickly as a team can you actually make decisions and implement them, or are you drowning in process? So after sort of talking about this for a short while, let's start to dig into this a little bit more in detail and tell you where I'm going with this. So for a long time, we talk about waste. You hear people talk about the great waste of lean. So let's look at what the creator or the architect of lean thinking, or the Toyota production system, Taiichi Ohno, called the purpose of lean. And in one of the books he wrote, and this is a quote, he said, the fundamental doctrine of the Toyota production system, the basis of all lean thinking, is the total elimination of waste. But I started to dig in a little bit deeper to understand what we meant by waste and this word muda, which a lot of lean practitioners use. And it actually means a lot more. When you look at the Japanese meaning, it looks a lot more deeply behind the scenes. And it's not just looking at waste as we'd look at it in the West, meaning trash or something that we shouldn't be doing. It means it's senseless or meaningless, uselessness or futility. So really it's about the lack of professionalism leading to unnecessary costs. And it talks about everybody having the requirement to focus on eliminating unnecessary effort or spending. So we're getting much more now into the behavior side of things. And if we look at We all are familiar, or hopefully you're all familiar, and if you're not familiar, you should be familiar with the 8 key wastes that are described in lean thinking. And so for many years, we've looked at these 8 wastes as a way to reduce cost and to eliminate waste, and simply summarized, stop doing wasteful things. But what do we actually mean by that? Well, in the lean world, for a long time, we've always described the greatest waste in manufacture or creating products as what's called overproduction, because overproduction leads to many of these other wastes. If we're overproducing materials, it leads to excess inventory, excess transportation as we move the inventory around, excess motion as people are working with that inventory, and so on. We create additional waste by overproducing. But I want to posit something in this this digital age and this age of thought work and thought leadership, and to sort of talk a knowledge work, and to sort of suggest that the greatest waste everywhere else is waiting. And this is what is really hurting us significantly. So I'm going to keep my eye on time. There we go. And so let's talk about where time and money goes when we're working in these digital value streams. And we're hearing a lot more talk about digital value streams now. And I can tell you that a lot of the practitioners talking about digital value streams are only talking about the bit in the middle, the digital bit, and are ignoring all the other aspects of a value stream. And I'll look at that shortly. So let's look at where time and money goes. Imagine we've got some work here. Here's some value-added work we're doing. So we start an initiative, and we've got sort of nearly 50 weeks, a year-long initiative here. So at the beginning, we start in week 1, we do some sort of value-added work as the customer gives us an order. And then typically, there's a bunch of waiting that happens before we end up doing some of the design work, and then another bunch of waiting before we do some more value-added work. We've got some non-value-added, but unfortunately currently necessary activity, and then typically a bunch of waiting happens, waiting for legal, waiting for procurement, waiting for contracting, waiting for vendor management, waiting for master services agreements, waiting for non-disclosures, waiting for purchase orders, waiting for something to happen, external dependencies. And this is where we start to find where our value is disappearing. If we do the math, and I won't bore you with the detail of exactly how to work all this out, but if you do the math, you've got about 160 hours of value-added activity in this example, and over 1,500 hours of non-value-added activity. It gives you a process cycle efficiency of only 10% based on a normal 40-hour working week. If you think that seems a little extreme, and if you think that seems a little bit fanciful, let me show you a real one. Here's one I did in Toyota a few years ago. There's 642 hours of waiting in a simple process. On the left-hand side of the picture you're seeing is where the process starts, and you've got something that should take a couple of days to complete in the various different steps. This is over 7 meters wide when we map this process. That's 16 weeks of waiting in there in Toyota, in the most efficient company in the world. Let's have a look now at where we look in the digital world, because most of you are hunting in the digital world for improvements, and there's this new setup called the Value Stream Consortium, which is all focused on looking in the digital world. And essentially, you're not going to find improvement in the value-added work you're doing. The biggest improvement you're going to find is eliminating this waiting. The problem is this waiting is hidden in digital value streams. If you're in a factory or a manufacturing facility, you can see people and process just waiting. If you're in the digital world, you do not see this waiting at all. Let's look at the thing called the theory of constraints. This was popularized by a gentleman by the name of Goldratt in a book called The Goal. Many of you may be familiar with it. The theory of constraints talks about anything that prevents the system from achieving a better performance measure towards its goal. And just adding capacity, if you look in this area, we've had capacity here, performance declines here because we have a constraint in the system. Similar sort of idea, this is what we would call a bottleneck. And so what we're looking to do is to relieve bottlenecks to the flow of value. Now, a bottleneck is a resource with capacity less or equal to the demand put on it. So you're asking more from the system than the system is able to deliver. And most people are familiar with that. There's always more demand than there is capacity. Now, a bottleneck can be called a constraint, but a constraint isn't always a bottleneck. There are many constraints in an organization which prevent us from actually getting things done, political, financial, etc. What we want to try and do is reduce or avoid continuous handoffs between various different parts of the system. And to do that, we use something called value stream mapping. Now, there's a lot of people out there going to say, we know this, Nigel, but bear with me for a few moments on this while I sort of bring back some of the fundamental practices and principles that a lot of practitioners seem to be missing when they're just talking about getting the right mindset and making sure that we're just being super agile. We've got this thing I've described over a while called work as imagined versus work as done. So management's idea is that the bicyclist, the cyclist in the picture, work starts and work finishes, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the middle, and it's all pretty simple. Most of us know the reality looks something like the picture at the bottom. So let's talk about value. Value flows horizontally through an organization. Organizations are organized vertically in these silos or these islands of disconnected effort throughout an organization, but value rarely flows vertically and typically flows horizontally throughout these different parts of an organization. And if we define what a value stream is, going from customer needs to customer outcomes, a value stream contains all the people, the machines, the technology, and all the skills needed to complete the end-to-end product delivery. And this includes the business, not just the technologists. And if you're in a large-scaled organization where you're working with multiple teams, this is in the literature called a multi-team system, and a value stream then would consist of 2 or more teams that together are independently capable of completing the end-to-end product delivery. The challenge is that most organizations with a value stream jump in and do some optimization with some lean thinking or some agile techniques, or we start doing Scrum or implement SAFe, and we tend to do it right just here. And we ignore these other departments, business, finance, legal, and these other elements, compliance, procurement. And we've heard some speakers talk about some of these already today. And so what we do is we sub-optimize by applying lean and agile thinking here, and we ignore the overall value stream, which contains all the people, machines, technology, etc., to complete the end-to-end product delivery. So when you start to optimize delivery in an organization, applying lean and agile type techniques here is not sufficient. They need to be applied across the entire organization. And this is something that a lot of organizations are missing. They're forgetting the lean principles. They're jumping in here and doing a bunch of agile stuff, and they wonder why the organization isn't getting the benefits that they desire. So we need to start doing some basic things. And really, let's talk about mapping a value stream. Well, the basic concept is really simple. You've got some departments that do work. Each of those departments take some time to do the work. And in lean thinking, this is called cycle time. And between each department, there's something called waiting, where we're waiting for things to actually happen and get completed. And if we measure the beginning when we start the work to the point when we finish the work, that's the lead time for the product, the time it takes to produce a product from beginning to end. And then if we add in the time that the customer waits before you even start working on the product, you get what's known as customer lead time. This is just some very, very basic principles. To figure this out, all you need is a wall. You don't need anything fancy. You just need a wall where you can start working on the way a process happens. This is a real one that I did with a team some time ago. And of course, the people who will do the work. Now, let's look at how you should do this. There's a technique called linear contextualization. And if you read the book Learning to See by John Shuck and Mike Rother, they'll talk about this at some level. But essentially, we're going to consider the changes as we map the actual process. And these are the tools that we should be using. Start with the finished product. Start where you've finished delivering a product or service, or if you prefer, an item in your backlog. And then draw on a wall or on a piece of paper or some large, use mural or Miro if you're using the digital canvas, and write down the name of a process. Write down the details of what you just did just before you finished the piece of work, whatever that piece of work was, delivery to the customer. Was that value added or non-value added, and how long did it take? Did it add value to the product, or was it just some process you had to do because somebody said you had to do it? Then start going backwards. Go back in time, because it's very hard to lie backwards. And this really makes you consider why you did what you did by looking at the things in a reverse manner. And this is this part of this process called linear contextualization. Start mapping your processes backwards until you've got your entire process mapped out, and how you got to the finished goods by looking back in time to the beginning of the process, add in all the time it took to wait. And now you can start to look at what was value added, what was non-value added, and of course, how much time you were waiting. And then you can actually start to work out where your process cycle efficiency is and where your inefficiencies are. And as Ono said, all we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us the order to the point when we collect the cash. Are we reducing the timeline by reducing the non-value adding waste? Now, most of you going through transformational journeys tend to focus on this resource efficiency. Let's get our organization reorganized. Let's make sure people are busy. Let's make sure everybody's effective and efficient and running around as quickly as they can, rather than focusing on flow efficiency, which is how rapidly you're getting the product to your customer. I highly recommend reading this book. This is Lean by Nicholas Modig. It's a very good book. Now, I'm sure there's a bunch of you out there. I know there's several hundred people watching today, and guarantee there's a lot of you out there going, Nigel, this is nothing new. Why are you telling us all this? Well, if you already know this, why are you still not doing it? Because if you're not getting the gains in your organizations, if you're not creating the new capacity for innovation and creativity, if you're not able to get the work done in the time that you want to get it done, I would suggest we need to go back to some of the lean fundamentals and to start mapping these processes and to start understanding where the inefficiencies are that we can eliminate. And once you've done this, let's talk about another tool, this thing everybody loves called Kanban, developed by Toyota as far as a just-in-time system was concerned. But a Kanban board isn't just a board full of Post-it notes. And once you've done this mapping, you can now use this to see the unseen. Because if you can't see it, you don't know what you need to fix. Now, typically, when I use a Kanban board, or a board that people call a Kanban board full of Post-it notes, I start to map all the processes. And the most important column for me on the board is the queuing columns, the waiting columns, all these columns where there's work that's been done by a previous department has now been handed off or passed to another department, another step in the process, even in a team, if you've got a team that's working where you're handing work off to each other. And so what we really want to be doing is limiting the work in progress on the queues, on the waiting column, not on the column where the work is being done. And we start to quickly visualize where the problems are, the bottlenecks are. And then I start to build really large Kanban boards, and I challenge you all to do this, to build some really large boards which start to map every single process. If you have a set of 10 processes, 20 processes, 30 processes, map them on a board. Take Jira or whatever other tool you're using and create a board that has a step for every single process and a column for every time something waits for the next process to happen. Once you start to do this, you'll start to visualize where the waste is in the system and where the efficiency gains can be gained. I'll give you an example of a process we did this with. One of my ex-colleagues did this for a client. I won't tell you who the client is, of course. But this was 2-week sprints. This organization, we're doing 2-week sprints developing software, nothing too grandiose here, all web-based software. Except it took them 81 days to deliver any user story in a 2-week sprint. So a 2-week sprint was taking 81 days. And we did the math, it's about 2 to 2.5% efficient. That's 98% waste. And if we look at the details, we had about 61 days of waiting in there, and an average lead time to get an item from the intake column or the to-do column to the done column was taking about 81 days. When we mapped it on a board, we could actually start to see where all the process inefficiencies were and where all the waiting was happening. And we were very rapidly able to make some significant gains. Once you're using Kanban, you can start to map things effectively. So here's your intake column. As soon as you put something in your intake column, write on it the date and time, because this is your customer lead time from the point when an item enters the backlog, or whether it's the product backlog or whether it's an intake column on a Kanban board. This now is how long your customer is waiting for the item to be delivered. As soon as you start moving to the first process, in this example, waiting for the designers to work, then we've got the date and time written again. This becomes your product lead time. How long is it going to take for the product to be delivered? And then as soon as we start moving into the next process, we write the date and time when the actual work starts, because we can actually start to measure the product cycle time, the time it takes to build the product. And then, of course, we can map each of the columns independently, and we can start to measure how long each process takes, what the waiting time is between each step. Once you start to make things visible in this way, you will actually start to see where your problems are. And if you become more lean by eliminating the waste, you will by definition become more agile, because you're creating the space for the innovation and the creativity, because you're eliminating the elements that are causing your delays, which are consuming all your team's capacity. And these are the things that are most underlooked in most companies today. This is doing it at Toyota, just to show that Toyota do use their own tools. This was in Toyota Financial Services a couple of years ago, and I was working there. And this is where these same techniques were being used at very large scale, 1,500 developers, to understand where work was. So I think we're getting close to question time. So let's talk about what Agile is. Agile is not about speed. People implementing Agile, when I talk to most organizational directors and I say, why are you using Agile? Why are you going in this Agile direction? Because we want to be faster. Agility is not about speed. It's about making faster decisions. Eliminate waiting, eliminate non-value added work. The lean principles will enable faster decision making. And usually that involves talking to the customers. That's one of the key principles. So speed is an emergent property of changing your behaviors. Agile is an emergent property of being lean. And if you want to know what the biggest constraint is, it's us, we, the people. The biggest challenge is you. It's not technological, it's behavioral. There is nothing stopping us in organizations from making these changes and identifying where changes need to happen, other than we, the people themselves. I've started to sort of suggest that most organizational, or indeed all organizational complexity, is human derived. And I'd ask you to consider, if you have a problem or a constraint in an organization, if you remove the people, is the problem still complex? Because if the problem is easy to solve without the people problem, then it's a human derived complexity. And if humans created the complexity, we can remove it. So listen, we only have one life. Don't spend it waiting. Use some of these typical lean techniques, value stream mapping, Kanban visualization, to identify where the constraints, the bottlenecks, the waiting is in the organization. focus on relieving those constraints rather than focus on implementing more and more methods, tools, techniques, and approaches, and trying to do SAFe or Scrum even more vigorously, because it isn't going to make you more agile. Solving some of these fundamental lean problems are going to make you more agile. Stop talking about mindsets, start getting shared mental models, start working together to change behaviors and attitudes, and start solving some of these challenges. I hope that was useful. I'm going to hand back now for some questions, and hopefully we've got some questions or some challenges to me. So we have 10 minutes for questions, I believe. So I'm going to hand back to our friends. I seem to have lots of mirror images there of me. Baris.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel, for this inspirational talk. And I have a couple questions from the audience. So
Sure.
one of them is related more about the methods, the approach that you showed us. So what is the main difference of this flow system than the Kanban system, the original Kanban?
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, I wasn't really talking about the flow system specifically today, just because the question was asked. I'll give you the answer. So the flow system is not a framework. It's not a methodology. It's not a prescription. You can see it behind me if the visuals are good enough. But the flow system is actually a system of learning and understanding. It's helping people to understand we're in an age of complex problems. In fact, we've been in an age of complex problems for some time. So it's a system of learning and understanding to help people understand complexity, which is, if I wave my hand over here, this is complexity, and then to bring in some new techniques and styles of leadership, and to understand some things around team science, the way teams and humans interact with each other, the human factors, the behaviors. It's built on a foundation of lean thinking because of my background, of course, in Toyota. And of course, most of the Agile world is built on a background of lean thinking from the Toyota world anyway. If you talk to the original pundits in the Agile Manifesto era, or the Scrum, Jeff and Ken from the Scrum world, they'll all cite Toyota extensively. So essentially what the flow system is doing is helping people understand the different tools, techniques, methods, approaches, the different challenges, the different techniques, the different concepts, so that they can better decide how to solve challenges within their unique context. All work is context specific. Trying to apply a one-size-fits-all fixed framework on an organization gives you some feeling of robustness, but it's not very resilient. In other words, it can't change and adapt rapidly as the world changes and adapts rapidly. And in fact, we've seen that with many organizations suffering with global supply chain disruption. I hope that's a quick enough answer really on the flow system. I'd urge people to go read the free guide online and learn a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Nigel. My next question about the value streams. One of the participants asks that how does mapping those kind of value streams affect companies' productivity, especially in the manufacturing? So
it's really, yeah, I mean, that's really, it's the fundamental or the quintessential tool for that. I mean, productivity depends how you measure productivity, because a lot of people measure people running faster in the hamster wheel. Just because people are busy, they think they're productive. But effectively, what is productivity? If you're delivering value to your customers, you're reducing the time to market, you're reducing the cost to deliver or the cost to produce, and you're improving quality, and you're delivering value to a customer. And even Deming said that quality has no meaning except with the customers, sort of from the customer's needs or perspective. A customer will define what quality is, not you as a manufacturer or a producer. And so essentially productivity needs to be measured from a point of view of the flow of value to a customer. And that when you start to map how you deliver, you take a requirement and you're going to deliver some value to a customer. There's a whole bunch of things that happen in the middle. Understanding those things that happen in the middle and how to make those more efficient and more effective will improve your productivity. But be careful, productivity doesn't just mean producing lots of things. If you've got nobody to buy those things or consume those things, or nobody that sees value in what you're doing, then stop producing them. Because producing nothing may be more productive than producing a lot of something. unless you've got a customer that's willing to consume them. Boris.
Thank you. The next question is about the pandemic situation. One of our participants again wants to learn your thoughts about what effect do you think that the pandemic has had on the development of lean mindset and agility in the business world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And I've talked about this in some of my other keynotes on quite a level. I mean, I've talked about what we call evil lean or mean lean, or were we too lean? Were we not agile enough? Because, you know, we've seen this global supply chain disruption. And even in America, the land of the free and the land of the plenty, I still can't buy toilet paper. It's impossible to buy any quantity of any of these sort of goods because the supply chain is so badly disrupted, and most of our manufacturing is in some other country. And so when we try to get products and services into the US, of course, we're constrained by supply chain logistics. And Ono used to talk about this called what he would call fake Kanban and supplier bullying, which is where we pushed everything a long way away from where we actually needed it. And we leaned out our supply chain so much. We used lean just to reduce costs. And we didn't actually think about lean from a just-in-time perspective. And it became just too late. And that's one of the consequences we're getting now. So, and this is one of the challenges with organizations that implement lean or agile sort of thinking, is they use them for the wrong reasons. They use them purely to reduce costs. They don't use them to deliver better services and better value to the customers. And I understand the reason they want to reduce costs, but they focus too heavily on that. And then you get the consequences that we have with the pandemic, which is when the way we do things is badly disrupted. Our supply chains were not robust. In other words, they couldn't withstand the impact, and the level of resilience they had, the ability to recover quickly, took too long. And indeed, I mean, we're now we're in the recovery phase now for a lot of people, at least in the USA. But it's taking a long time to recover because we invested incorrectly, and we use lean and agile techniques, especially lean techniques, incorrectly, and now we've got the consequences of recovering from that. So I think abandoning lean is the wrong idea. I think using lean correctly and appropriately and looking at the mistakes we made, and actually looking at some of these techniques like mapping value streams to understand how we get from requirement to fulfillment is absolutely critically important, because that will reveal the weaknesses in our supply chains and in our value streams. And that's where we need to put the investment and the effort to fix that. And the reality of it is things will become more expensive, because if we have to have some form of capability to create robustness and resilience in our supply chains, that probably means more of the capability and more of the manufacturing will have to be done closer to the customer, because otherwise we're going to continue to suffer as we're doing now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nigel. So this was the last question, and thank you very much again for being with us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Boris.
See you in Turkey, maybe in person in the near future.
Yeah, I would really love to be. I mean, I've done a lot of these virtual conferences. I was very lucky to be in Europe recently, and I went to Italy, to Hungary, and to Poland and presented, and it was just fantastic to be back with people, talking to people. We took the health precautions, but we were able to talk to people and get engaged. And I think that's something I very much look forward to. So hopefully next year you'll see me in Turkey, and I can meet a lot of the wonderful people that are watching this conference today online. Thank you, Boris.
No, thank you.